The cabin of Flight 766, bound from Dubai to America, hummed with quiet anticipation. The passengers, a mix of weary business travelers and eager vacationers, settled into their seats. Luggage bumped overhead. A faint scent of cinnamon pastries and recycled air drifted through the aisles. Despite the plush first-class seats and glossy interiors, a certain tension hung in the atmosphere, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. Yet no one could have guessed what. Anna, the flight attendant, moved briskly between rows. She wore the crisp, dark blue uniform of the airline, her hair neatly tied back. Though usually attendants greeted passengers with forced cheer, Anna's expression was different. There was a certain hardness to her eyes. Her smile looked more like a formality than a genuine welcome. Few passengers noticed at first. After all, long-haul flights often made crew members tired and irritable. In first class, a woman named Victoria sat quietly by the window. She was a black woman with a poised demeanor, elegant, yet strangely unassuming. She had chosen a seat by herself, not making eye contact, preferring to read a magazine and occasionally glance out at the runway lights. Her attire was simple, a soft blouse, comfortable trousers, nothing flashy. She spoke to no one, and no one spoke to her. But that was about to change. The engines roared softly as ground crew finished their checks. Overhead screens flickered, showing safety instructions and expected flight paths. Most passengers tried to settle in for what would be a long journey across continents. Some dozed off. Others browsed through their phones until they would have to switch them to airplane mode. Anna passed by Victoria without so much as a nod. The attendant's mind seemed elsewhere, perhaps on the workload, or maybe on some personal frustration lingering beneath her polished exterior. No one could have predicted the storm brewing inside Anna's head, nor the role Victoria would soon play in changing the course of this flight. A silent undercurrent of fate swirled through the cabin, waiting for the right moment to surface and catch everyone completely off guard. As the plane lifted off, the cabin lights dimmed, and passengers found themselves suspended between two worlds, leaving the desert skyline behind and soaring toward distant American shores. The giant aircraft stabilized, and the seatbelt sign clicked off, freeing everyone to move about. A few passengers stretched their legs, while others sank deeper into their plush seats. Victoria remained quiet, hands folded in her lap. She seemed content to watch the soft glow of the overhead reading light, her magazine lying unopened beside her. A young couple in the row across glanced at her curiously, puzzled by her calm composure. She had an air of quiet confidence, as if she knew something others didn't. Yet nothing about her stood out as extraordinary. No flashy jewelry, no entourage. Just a solitary figure, serene and patient. Meanwhile, Anna made her rounds with a tray of beverages. Her colleagues kept their polite smiles, offering sodas and water with gentle nods. Anna, however, seemed distracted. Each time she filled a plastic cup or handed over a can, her lips pressed tighter together. A passenger in economy asked for an extra napkin, and Anna sighed audibly before granting the request. She was not in a pleasant mood, and it showed. The other flight attendants noticed Anna's demeanor, but chose not to intervene yet. Everyone has off days, they reasoned. The supervisor, a stocky man in a neat blazer, busied himself with paperwork and whispered instructions to a junior crew member. He trusted Anna's professionalism, even if her spirits were low. Victoria shifted in her seat, feeling that subtle tension rolling down the aisle. She could sense eyes on her, sense the unease in the cabin crew's posture. Yet, she said nothing. She was waiting, perhaps, or just enjoying her solitude. It was still early in the flight, and no one had any inkling of the drama that would soon unfold. The gentle hum of the engines masked the quiet storm building behind Anna's eyes, and the mystery of Victoria's calm presence hovered silently, like a secret waiting for its grand reveal. The hours ticked by slowly. The plane soared high above endless oceans, tiny pinpricks of light from distant stars visible outside the windows. Inside, A hush had settled. A few passengers slept, blankets pulled up to their chins. Others gazed at in-flight movies, lost in worlds different from the one unfolding around them. Anna's restlessness didn't fade. She moved from row to row, checking on passengers, but struggling to maintain even a veneer of friendliness. A family asked for juice. She handed it over stiffly. A business traveler asked if there were peanuts. Anna clenched her jaw before retrieving a small packet. Her politeness was mechanical, her frustration growing like a low flame beneath the surface. Victoria watched quietly. She noticed the way Anna's footsteps were just a bit too heavy, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. She observed without judgment, yet with keen awareness. Outside, the engines droned steadily, and the cabin lights were a gentle glow. Inside first class, everyone sensed that the flight attendant's mood was souring, but no one dared comment. They hoped to avoid becoming a target for her displeasure. As Anna pushed her service cart forward, a sudden turbulence made it wobble. She gripped the handle tightly, muttering under her breath. The plane steadied, but the incident only worsened her mood. She cast a quick glance at Victoria, who was reading now, flipping through glossy pages, unperturbed. In the galley, another attendant suggested Anna take a short break, maybe breathe for a moment. Anna brushed the suggestion aside. She wouldn't admit it, but something about Victoria, her calm, her confidence, her quiet observation, was irritating her. Though Victoria had done nothing wrong, Anna felt strangely provoked by her mere presence. The rest of the crew noticed Anna's tension. They exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. Passengers remained unaware of the internal conflicts simmering just beyond their rows. For now, everyone floated somewhere over the Atlantic, blissfully ignorant of the confrontation soon to erupt, an event that would leave the entire cabin in shock and disbelief. It happened just after the meal service. Anna had been pouring drinks, trying to maintain her composure, when a slight bump in turbulence caused her to jerk the tray forward. A cold drink, soda with ice, slipped from its holder. In a split second, it splashed across Victoria's blouse, drenching her in sticky liquid. The sound of the spill was sharp in the hush of first class, drawing every nearby eye. Victoria gasped quietly, startled but maintaining her poise. She dabbed at her blouse with a napkin, her expression more surprised than angry. Anna froze, staring at the mess she had caused, her cheeks flushing red. A dozen pairs of eyes looked on, waiting to see what would happen next. "You should have watched where you were going," Anna snapped, more harshly than she intended. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Gasps rippled through the passengers who caught her tone. Victoria arched a brow, astonished at the sudden hostility. "I beg your pardon?" Victoria said softly, her voice calm but firm. She wasn't raising her voice, but her words held weight. The surrounding passengers braced themselves. They knew this interaction was fragile, that it could ignite into something explosive if either side pushed too hard. Anna's frustration erupted. She accused Victoria of leaning out of her seat, of being in the way. The logic was flimsy, and everyone knew it. It was clear that Anna had simply lost her temper. Passengers in nearby rows stared wide-eyed, some leaning forward in disbelief. Victoria set aside her napkin. "I think we both know the fault isn't mine," she said. Her tone remained composed, as if she were handling a trivial misunderstanding. But that only fueled Anna's anger. The flight attendant's temples throbbed, and her voice rose again, quivering with tension. The atmosphere grew heavy, making everyone wonder if Anna would apologize, or if this tiny spark would become a roaring blaze. No one could have imagined how quickly the situation would escalate, or the irreversible step Anna was about to take, one that would haunt the rest of the flight and beyond. In a moment that seemed to stretch into slow motion, Anna's composure snapped like a brittle twig. She raised her hand and slapped Victoria across the cheek. The sound was startling, sharp, shocking, and impossible to ignore. The cabin fell silent, as if all the air had been sucked out at once. Passengers couldn't believe their eyes. A flight attendant striking a passenger? Unthinkable. Victoria's head turned slightly from the impact, but when she looked back at Anna, her eyes were calm, disbelieving but unwavering. She touched her cheek gently, as if to confirm that what had just happened was real. The entire first-class cabin held its breath, waiting to see what Victoria would do. No one spoke. Not the other attendants, not the supervisor, not the other passengers. Some covered their mouths, others looked to each other for guidance. The gentle hum of the airplane's engines provided the only sound. Anna's heart pounded, realization sinking in too late. She knew she had gone too far, but pride and anger kept her frozen. Victoria stood slowly, smoothing her blouse, her posture regal and steady. "That was a grave mistake," she said softly, her voice carrying a subtle authority. She didn't shout, didn't threaten, but her calm made the moment even more intense. Just then, the uniformed man, an airline officer, arrived. He had been alerted by whispers and concerned murmurs. Now he stood at the edge of the first-class cabin, surveying the scene. A poised passenger with a red mark on her cheek, a flight attendant trembling with anger and regret, and a row of stunned witnesses. He approached cautiously, uncertain how to untangle this knot of tension. Victoria turned to the officer and spoke clearly. "I expect this matter to be handled promptly," she said. "I will not tolerate such behavior." Her words lingered in the thick air, and the officer nodded gravely. He understood that this was more than a passenger-crew altercation. Something about Victoria's demeanor suggested she carried weight in this airline's world, a truth that would soon be revealed, changing everything for those on board. The officer introduced himself as Mr. Davis, the airline's onboard operations manager, a figure who rarely had to intervene in passenger disputes. His presence alone usually quelled unrest. But here, he was faced with an unprecedented situation, a flight attendant assaulting a first-class passenger. He glanced at Victoria's calm face, at Anna's flushed one, and knew he had to act decisively. "Ma'am," he began, addressing Victoria, "could you please help me understand what happened?" His voice was respectful, but firm. Passengers craned their necks to listen. Anna opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. She hovered behind Davis, trying to shrink from view. Victoria reached into her purse, producing a small, sleek card. She handed it to Davis without a word. As he read the card, a wave of recognition washed over his features. His eyes widened, and a faint tremor passed through his hands. He gulped, rereading the name to be sure he hadn't misread. In that moment, the tension thickened. What was on that card? Passengers whispered among themselves, puzzled. Anna frowned, trying to peek around Davis's shoulder. Victoria stood calmly, arms crossed over her chest, waiting for the inevitable reaction. Davis straightened his blazer and cleared his throat. His demeanor shifted immediately. He stepped toward Victoria and inclined his head, voice dropping to a respectful tone. "I am deeply sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "I assure you that appropriate action will be taken immediately. Please, if you could return to your seat, we will handle this." The crowd looked on, confused. Anna's eyes darted between Davis and Victoria, fear gnawing at her. She sensed that this woman's identity carried extraordinary importance. Why else would Davis, usually stoic, become so visibly rattled? Victoria returned to her seat without argument, her calm never wavering. Passengers watched, enthralled by the unfolding mystery. They had no idea who this poised black woman truly was, or why her card had struck fear and respect into the airline's officer. But the secret would not remain hidden for long, and soon the entire cabin would know the truth. Davis turned to Anna, his eyes as hard as polished steel. He needed no further evidence, no lengthy investigation. The incident had played out in front of too many witnesses. He took a deep breath, mindful that how he handled this would reflect on the airline itself. "Anna," he began, voice controlled but cold, "I'm relieving you of your duties effective immediately. You're no longer employed by this airline. The declaration shocked everyone. Passengers gasped. A few whispered to one another, trying to piece together the puzzle. Anna's face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Fired on the spot? In front of all these passengers? "Mr. Davis," she managed, her voice cracking. "You can't be serious. I've worked here for years. Please." He cut her off with a sharp look. "You assaulted a passenger. There is no excuse. I will inform the captain and the rest of the crew. You are to remain seated and refrain from interacting with any passenger until we land." Stunned silence followed. The other attendants pressed themselves against the galley walls, horrified but powerless. The passengers were both shocked and intrigued. Was the passenger who had been slapped someone of immense influence? Could she have that much power? Davis cleared his throat. "I must also inform everyone," he announced quietly but clearly, "that the passenger in question is, in fact, one of the principal owners of this airline. Her authority surpasses mine, and I fully respect her decision regarding how this situation will be handled." A ripple of astonishment spread through the cabin. The quiet woman in first class, the black woman who had seemed so unassuming, was actually a top figure in the airline's hierarchy. The pieces clicked into place. This explained Davis's sudden deference, the immediate termination of Anna's employment, and the tension that hovered in the aftermath. Anna sank into a nearby seat, despair settling over her. Her career lay in ruins, undone by her own temper. Victoria watched, saying nothing, holding all the power in her steady, forgiving eyes. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed. Passengers who once only cared about legroom and in-flight entertainment were now riveted by the human drama playing out before them. They watched Victoria, the airline owner, and Anna, the disgraced flight attendant, as if following a gripping movie scene. The hum of the engines faded into background noise. Anna, struggling to contain her panic, turned to Victoria. Gone was the earlier arrogance. She looked at Victoria with pleading eyes. "Ma'am," Anna said softly, her voice trembling, "I'm so sorry for what I did. Please, please don't let this be the end of my career. I was frustrated, tired maybe, but I never should have lost control like that." Passengers leaned in, eager to see how Victoria would respond. Would she show mercy or double down on punishment? After all, Victoria had been physically assaulted, humiliated before a cabin of onlookers. Surely she had every right to be unforgiving. Victoria studied Anna's face. She could see remorse there, genuine regret. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that Victoria now held Anna's entire future in her hands. Yet Victoria didn't look triumphant. She wore a serious expression, as if weighing a difficult decision. Slowly, Victoria stood. "I understand that everyone has moments of weakness," she said evenly. "I also understand that stress and fatigue do not excuse violence or disrespect." Her words hung in the air, each syllable measured and calm. Anna's heart pounded. Every passenger leaned forward, waiting for the verdict. Victoria tapped her fingers thoughtfully against her armrest. She was not one to make decisions in haste, not even under these circumstances. Finally, she sighed softly. "I will consider giving you another chance," she said. "I believe in second chances when genuine remorse is shown." A murmur of surprise traveled through the cabin. Many expected a harsh punishment, but here was the owner extending a hand of mercy. Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking with gratitude. In that moment, both women stood at the crossroads of an unexpected lesson, one about power, humility, and the grace of forgiveness. Relief washed over Anna like a cool breeze. She could hardly believe her ears. Victoria, the very passenger she had wronged, was willing to give her another chance. The cabin's silence was broken by soft whispers of admiration. Passengers recognized the magnitude of Victoria's forgiveness. It wasn't just about one altercation. It was a demonstration of true leadership and compassion. Victoria addressed the flight attendant, her voice carrying a gentle firmness. "However," she continued, "this cannot go unremarked. You need to understand the weight of your position. As a flight attendant, you represent the airline's values. Respect, kindness, and professionalism are not optional. They are integral to who we are as a company." Anna nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She knew she was lucky. If Victoria had insisted on the immediate termination, no one would have blamed her. Instead, Victoria was offering a chance at redemption, a lesson learned at 30,000 feet above the ocean. The passengers looked on, inspired. Some began to clap, soft at first, then louder. They applauded Victoria's calm leadership and her willingness to guide rather than destroy. In that moment, the cabin felt more unified than ever before, as if everyone understood something deeper about human decency and empathy. Mr. Davis, who had taken a step back during the exchange, cleared his throat. He was clearly moved. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you have my utmost respect. Please know that we will conduct a thorough review of this incident once we land. For now, let's ensure the rest of the flight proceeds smoothly." Victoria nodded. She returned to her seat, the tension easing into a sense of closure. Anna remained standing for a moment, wiping her eyes and gathering herself. She approached Victoria's seat hesitantly, voice hushed. "I will never forget this kindness," she said. "I promise to do better." Victoria offered a tight-lipped smile and inclined her head. The lesson was clear. Power is not about crushing others. It's about guiding them toward understanding. And forgiveness can often restore more than punishment ever could. As the flight neared its destination, the atmosphere in the cabin was remarkably different from a few hours before. The fear and tension had dissolved into respect and reflection. Passengers felt they had witnessed something extraordinary, a story they would share with friends and family once on the ground. The plane began its descent toward the American coastline. Victoria looked out the window, watching the clouds drift past. She seemed at peace, as if she had accomplished something meaningful beyond her original purpose of travel. Her identity no longer secret. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had defined her all along. Anna, having composed herself, assisted another flight attendant with a soft drink request, this time carefully, respectfully, with genuine humility shining through her actions. She had been shaken to the core and, in that shaking, transformed. She understood now that courtesy is not just a job requirement. It's a moral duty. Every passenger, every colleague, deserved kindness and respect. The landing gear extended with a gentle thump. The captain announced their imminent arrival, thanking everyone for choosing the airline. Passengers smiled at each other, some still marveling at the surreal events of the journey. The clapping began quietly at first, the same clapping that had followed Victoria's demonstration of forgiveness, then rose to a warm applause that filled the cabin. It was more than just a polite gesture. It was an acknowledgement of shared humanity. Victoria stood, adjusting her carry-on. As passengers filed out, many thanked her personally or nodded respectfully, though words felt insufficient. Some just looked at her in awe, still not entirely believing that the quiet black woman who had seemed so ordinary was, in truth, the owner of the airline. Victoria offered them all a gentle smile. Anna stood by, head bowed slightly, a grateful look in her eyes. As Victoria passed, Anna whispered, "Thank you." One last time. Victoria nodded and walked onward, disappearing into the terminal and back into the world, leaving behind a simple but powerful message. Treat everyone with dignity, for you never know whose kindness may redefine your life.